Hi, I'm Rachel. I've got something I need to talk about. I've kept it buried for too long, and I don't want you to have a negative opinion of me. I'd like to tell you my story. I never thought I'd be in this situation, and I'm still trying to figure out how things got so out of control so fast. It's a memory that has haunted me for years. It was something my husband made me do that changed the course of my life. It all began a few years ago. John and I had been married for almost. By the time we reached our 10th anniversary, like most couples, we'd experienced our fair share of ups and downs. But I never thought it would happen like this. John was a great guy, but over time, something changed. He started to become more distant, more controlling, and less affectionate. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just the stress from work, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. One evening, John came home from work with a strange vibe. He seemed unusually upbeat, but there was something almost unsettling in the way he looked at me. We had dinner as usual, and just as I was just about to clear the dishes when John asked me to sit down. He sounded serious, so I took a seat. My heart started to race, and I could tell this wasn't going to be a run-of-the-mill conversation. John began, but he avoided making eye contact. He said, "I've been thinking. I've got something I need to share with you." I nodded, waiting for him to continue, but he didn't. He said he wanted to liven up our relationship. He said he'd been feeling bored and that he thought I meant a romantic getaway or maybe some counseling to rekindle the spark, but that wasn't it. What he suggested was nothing like that. "I've set up a meeting for us with two men." He was pretty direct about it. "They're coming over this weekend." I looked at him, not sure what he meant. I wasn't sure if he was joking or if this was some kind of test, but he looked really serious. My stomach churned, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "What do you mean, two men?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "They're friends of mine," he said, trying to sound casual as if this were normal. "Are we going to be spending the night together with them?" I was at a loss for words. My hands were shaking as I tried to make sense of what he was saying. This wasn't my husband. This wasn't the person I'd promised to spend my life with. He was talking about bringing two strangers into our home and into our marriage like it was no big deal. I was so upset, but more than that, I felt betrayed. I couldn't believe he was even suggesting something like this. "John, are you out of your mind?" I finally found my voice, my tone a mixture of disbelief and anger. "This isn't what we're about. I don't understand why you would even." Before I could finish, he interrupted me. "Rachel, this is happening," he said, his tone firm. "You need to understand the situation. It's something I want. It's something we need." I was floored. I loved JN, but I didn't understand why he was pushing me into something so degrading. It felt like it would undo all the work we'd put in together. I told him I wasn't going to go through with it. I figured that would be the end of it. I thought he'd realize it wasn't a good idea and back off. But I was wrong. Over the next few days, John became increasingly distant. He barely spoke to me unless it was about the plan. He started coming home late. When I asked where he'd been, we had some pretty intense conversations, and the love that once filled our home was replaced with a kind of suffocating silence. I felt trapped, isolated, and confused. How did we end up here? By Friday, I was really looking forward to it. John was adamant that the meeting was going ahead, regardless of what I said. I thought about leaving, packing my bags, and just walking out the door, but I didn't. Part of me was still holding on to the idea of the man I thought I knew. I knew this was just a phase, something we could work through. I wasn't ready to give up on our life together, but at the same time, I couldn't face going ahead with this plan. Saturday evening came around pretty fast. John's so-called friends showed up right on time at 8 p.m. I sat on the couch, my hands clenched in my lap, trying to hold back tears. I didn't even know their names, and now they were sitting in my living room. I was in the living room talking to my husband as if they were old buddies. The atmosphere was charged with tension, and I could feel their eyes on me, watching and waiting. I wanted to escape and leave the house without looking back, but then John leaned over and whispered, "It's time." I was frozen in place, my mind telling me to get up and leave, but my body wouldn't move. John's hand felt like a weight on my knee, keeping me in place. I couldn't look at him, and I certainly couldn't look at the two men sitting across from me. My heart was beating fast, and the room felt claustrophobic. "Rachel, please," John said again. His voice was lower now, almost pleading. There was something in his tone that made me stop and think. It wasn't just insistence, it was desperation. For the first time in days, I saw a hint of vulnerability in his eyes. This wasn't just about fulfilling some strange fantasy for him. It was about control, power, and something deeper that I couldn't quite grasp, but that didn't make it right. I had a bad feeling about all of this. "John," I finally said quietly, my voice trembling. "This isn't who we are." He let out a deep sigh and sat back, rubbing his temples in frustration. "You think I want this," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "I'm doing this for us, Rachel. Don't you understand?" "No, you're not." I fired back. "You're doing this for yourself, John. You've changed, haven't you? This isn't about us anymore. It's about control." For a second, I thought I saw guilt on your face, but it was gone just as fast. Instead, you clenched your jaw and stood up, pacing the room like someone who'd lost their way. I wanted to reach out and pull you back to the guy I used to know, but I didn't know how. We were so far from where we'd started, and I wasn't sure if we could ever find our way back as the silence stretched between us. One of the guys, let's call him Marcus, cleared his throat. He seemed to pick up on the tension, but there was an air of impatience about him. "Look," he said. He spoke in a calm but firm tone. "If this isn't going to happen, we should probably head out." I looked up at him and took him in for the first time. He wasn't what I was expecting. He was calm and respectful. He seemed more sympathetic than I'd imagined. I had built up this idea in my head that these men were predators, but I was wrong. They were just people, which made the whole situation even more confusing. I wasn't keen on staying. I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of whatever this was becoming, but I was stuck there. I was at a loss as to what to do. I felt trapped, like I was suffocating because I couldn't make up my mind. Then John spoke up. He spoke in a quiet but firm voice. "Rachel, if you leave, we're done." Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked at him, trying to make sense of what he'd just said. He'd drawn a line in the sand, and I had to decide which side I was going to take. I felt tears welling up, but I blinked them back. I wasn't going to let him see me crack. "I've given you everything," he continued, his voice steady but cold. "I've taken care of you, supported you, and this is all I'm asking for in return." I stood up, my legs shaking a bit, but I was determined. "John, this isn't love." I spoke in a quiet, almost inaudible voice. "This is manipulation." His eyes flashed with anger, but I was unfazed. I couldn't go through with this. I wouldn't do this. He tried to stop me, but he didn't. Instead, I heard him mutter something under his breath like, "You'll regret this." Maybe I would have too. Maybe leaving was a mistake. But at that moment, I knew I had to step away. I wasn't going to let JN or anyone else make me do something I wasn't comfortable with. As I stepped outside, I felt the cool evening air on my face, and I had a strange mixture of relief and heartbreak. My legs carried me down the street, my mind racing. I had to decide where I was going to go. I had no idea what to do next. I felt like I'd been let down and was at a loss. I wandered for what felt like hours before I found myself in front of my best friend Sarah's house. I knocked on the door, hoping she was home. When she opened the door and saw my tear-streaked face, she didn't ask any questions. She gave me a big hug and led me inside. Over the next few days, I stayed with Sarah to try to get my head around everything that had happened. I felt pretty empty. It felt like a part of me had been torn away. I missed John, but I also knew I couldn't go back. It was too late to fix what was broken. John tried calling me a few times, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry. He was all over the place, and I couldn't keep up with his changing emotions. I didn't respond to any of his calls, and eventually, he stopped trying to reach me. Over the next few months, I started to rebuild my life, taking it one step at a time. I filed for divorce because I knew our marriage was beyond repair. It was the toughest decision I've ever had to make, but in the end, it was the right one. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I felt like I was being manipulated and forced into situations that went against my beliefs. I still think about John sometimes, about the life we could have had if things had been different. But I've come to realize that I deserve better. I deserve a relationship built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding, not control and manipulation.